All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Olka Joshi Hansen. I'm Chief Program Officer at Grantmakers for Education. On behalf of Stephanie Waller and the rest of our team, I want to thank you for being here today with us for the first in a webinar on a series that's exploring the future of math. We are being sponsored in this by the Gates Foundation, which we're really grateful for, but this series as a whole is exciting to me. And after this conversation, I hope you're going to understand why. We kicked off this series with a 2.5-hour session at our conference a few weeks ago. And some of the comments we got were that this was a top-notch session. It was the most engaging session, even though it was really long, rich presentation, great discussion, truly excellent. And I think that just speaks to the really interesting issues and questions at play in the world of math today. And I'm so happy that Dave Kung, a colleague and a friend for many years, is here today and has also been part of designing and shepherding this series through. So thanks once again for joining us today. And I'm going to hand it off to Dave Kung. He's a math professor, a college professor, and the director of strategic partners at the Dana Center. He's going to be our host for today. So Dave, I will pass it off to you.
Olga, thank you so much. It's a joy to be here, and thanks to all of the EdFunders staff who have helped get us here. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk. I'm always excited to talk about mathematics, but especially excited to talk about mathematics teaching and learning, and what the philanthropic community can do to help make sure that every single student in this country has access to really high quality math experiences that help them reach their goals. So that to me is sort of our common goal. I'm going to be a little bit of a math nerd here and say that's my sort of axiom. That's the thing that I'm just going to assume. I'm going to assume that everybody in the room is on board with this goal of making sure all students have like positive, inspiring math experiences. They can bring their full selves to every class. And they see themselves as successful in math, and they gain the mathematics skills they need to reach whatever their aspirations are. So that's the axiom for the day. And then the question is, what can we do to make that closer to being true, and how can philanthropy help? I'm super excited to have just a really top-notch group of people today to have this conversation, and I do hope it's a conversation. And to those of you who are joining us, we are very intentional about this. This is a meeting. This is not in webinar format, which means that you too, everybody here, you can put your camera on and wave, and we can see you. You can unmute when you have a question. You can either put it in chat, or you can. When we have a chance for that, you can unmute yourself and ask your question live. We're hoping that you do that as we go through this. But we do have a fantastic panel, and I want to take a second to introduce them. All of us have PhDs, so I think we're going to dispense with the doctor part. Deborah Ball is named chair at the University of Michigan. She's on the AAAS Council. I could go on for the entire 50 minutes just about Deborah Ball's lengthy and fantastic accomplishments. But Deborah, welcome. It's great to have you here. We also have, and this is just alphabetical by last name, David Brassoud. He has a long and storied career at both Research School, Penn State, and the Liberal Arts College at Macalester. He's been involved in a million things, including the Conference Board of the Mathematical Sciences, the umbrella organization for math groups, and AP Calculus. And every time I get to introduce David, he says, please make sure to not forget one thing, which is that he was a Peace Corps volunteer back in the day. David, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We have Belin Tsinagini, who's his academic work. First of all, Belin is just a fantastic human, but his academic work is very much on the experiences of minoritized students, including Latinx and Indigenous students. He comes to us with an interesting and varied background himself, but his academic work is on mathematics education. He also taught at at Santa Fe Community College, and he's now working at West Ed, in particular with tribal colleges and universities and the math departments there. Belin, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to see you all. Happy to be here.
And last but not least, we have Eriswinger, who again just has an incredibly long and varied record of doing fantastic things. He's a professor at Georgia Gwinnett, and I'll just mention one more thing, which is that he is the executive director of NAM, the National Association of Mathematicians, the Black mathematicians, this group that supports Black mathematicians. Eris, it's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you, everybody.
And those of you who joined us for the kickoff, which was in person in Atlanta at the EdFunders, the Grantmakers for Education conference, it was Eris and I who were at that. As Olka said, I'm a mathematician by training. I spent 20 years as a professor at St. Mary's College in Maryland, and now I'm at the Dana Center. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just for a second to share one thing. Let's see, and which is to go back to what we were talking about in Atlanta. So in Atlanta, one of the things we talked about in that session, which some of you were at, I'm seeing some familiar faces here. We talked about dominant narratives and some of the narratives that sort of go unquestioned in mathematics classes, in mathematics teaching and learning. Eris, you want to give us like a quick version? You did such a great job, sort of more at length in Atlanta. You want to give us a quick version of what you see in these four? And then I added one that we didn't have. We certainly talked about it in Atlanta, but I added that last one.
Certainly, no, I appreciate that. Again, thank you everybody for coming and sharing this time with us. I am here in part because during this time, we'll be able to come up with something or in conversation, do something that we have never done before. So I'm super excited about this. So these were some of the narratives that we did talk about. And as I go through these narratives, I want us to think about the narratives themselves. And I also want us to think about who indeed might be left out when these narratives live and we don't fight them sufficiently. One narrative is get the right answer, right? Don't be wrong or you won't belong. I want you, as I go through these, I want you to think about your mathematical experiences or the mathematical experiences of others where this narrative might live. Faster is smarter. Speed over deliberate thinking in terms of getting that right answer. Either you have it or you don't, right? Is mathematics a body of knowledge or is it a natural human activity? Is it something that we all have access to, or the people who have this knowledge, this predetermined knowledge, have access to, or can everybody do it? And then math is neutral. Somehow it's just an objective expression of the universe and has nothing to do with people at all. And then the one we didn't talk about, which is super important, is that calculus is king. Calculus over everything. And how is that possible in a discipline as varied and as diverse as mathematics?
Excellent. Eris, thank you very much for that. If everybody's, I know some people are, doing a million other things while they're on this call, but if you could take a second and chat and reflect on one of these, like that was particularly important or notable in your own upbringing.
Yeah.
What resonates with you? So while everybody's Laura says all of them. That's great. Yeah, Eris, when you think back to your experiences, like what of these really hit home for you?
Oh, I was rewarded for getting the right answer.
Yeah.
I was rewarded for being faster. I was rewarded for having about it right. And so I had to, and hear me people when I say this, because lots of us on this call benefited from this, right? And so I had to go back and do some rewriting, right? And so when I would go back and look at my story, it used to be to go back and feel good about how I was hailed as being brilliant. And now I'll go back and look at all the people around me who were also just as brilliant, who were not hailed like I was, right? And so I had to really sit with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like Anne and Nicole are both saying that this idea of you have it or you don't, which I think is just totally tied up with all these sort of ideas of innate ability being like the primary thing that drives success within the mathematics community, as opposed to things like opportunity or hard work, and I think that that really underscores so much of the problems we see, of the barriers to reaching the sort of state that we've talked about. The calculus is king, Ilka. Yeah, and I think that we're all, if you've been a parent to a teenager, the struggle you're going with, because that in the current system, calculus is king. I think I saw Shakia Bland from the Just Equations here. Just Equations has done such great work on the fact that in the existing system, calculus is king, even if your kid wants to do something in social sciences. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Thank you so much for running learning through those. We're going to talk through these, and then I'm hoping people chime in at various times. If you ever have any questions, please put them in chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. If I don't, somebody will undoubtedly interrupt me and let me know that there's a great question that we should answer. Deborah, I wanted to come to you. We had the National Math Summit that a bunch of national organizations put together just about a month and a half ago. And I was really struck by the session that you ran that was really talking about teacher moves and the things that teachers do in the classroom that reinforce some of these narratives, especially those first two narratives, right? About being about speed and being about right. Can you talk a little bit about what your main point was in that session, Deborah?
Yeah, sure. I'm really glad to be here, Dave, with all of you. What I was talking about in that session was the moves that teachers can make to disrupt those narratives, in particular by thinking about three things. One is thinking about how to broaden everyone in the class, all the kids in the class, all the students in the class, their conceptions of what mathematics even is and what it is to be doing mathematics. So in some sense, it's what I'm about to say is also a subject matter goal. Like it helps to think about like a much broader view of what it is to be doing math and thinking about math. The second thing is to make explicit moves that acknowledge the competence of students in the class who are exhibiting those things, doing those things, and in particular, intervening on status hierarchies in the class. So I was showing a video and then naming very explicit things that teachers can do in the moment that reverse and interrupt the patterns of who's typically being identified as having done something smart or being smart, all these narratives we just saw. And also broadening for that moment, not only who's seen as smart, but what's even considered to be doing smart work in math. Could say smart or competent or whatever it is, but like learning to combine those so that you're really intervening on those patterns that just simply get reinforced all the time in classrooms.
Mm-hmm. And Deborah, when you're working with teachers on this, like, talk a little bit about the sort of inertia that you have to overcome, the sort of deeply held, the fact that teachers tend to have these sort of narratives deeply held by themselves. Like, what is the work to overcome that, to get them to value other things in the classroom, to get them to question, interrogate those narratives, and maybe even overturn them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a combination of things because part of it is overcoming those narratives and learning to think about assets and competences of students. But that also does, at least I mostly work with elementary teachers, but I think this would be true actually, frankly, for teachers at all levels, is actually learning and unlearning and relearning mathematics oneself. Because when we listen to students, we're often limited by what we ourselves understand, and we miss things that students do and say that are really brilliant. So I think some of this is actually a combination of that. A second thing is that teachers already often do think about praising students. And so I work really hard with teachers to think about the difference between praise and acknowledging competence. Praise is for sure a good thing to do sometimes, but acknowledging competence is different. It's a lot more specific. It's a lot more pointed. It's a lot more deliberate about who's being named. And it's intentional about the kinds of mathematical contributions that people are making that actually change the classroom. So I think overcoming several things that are essentially habitual and part of our own upbringing in schools and in mathematics, in some sense, those habits have to be broken and new habits learned. And we know something about breaking habits and learning new habits in lots of other realms that are different from teaching. But I do think that's helpful to think about it that way.
Can you give us a specific example of like in a moment where a teacher could make the choice to praise correctness or speed or something like that, and you're helping them to acknowledge competence instead?
Yeah, so we have a video that we often use to help teachers begin to think about this, where a student is talking about identifying a number on the line, and the student has not yet, as a young student, has just not learned yet that the interval from 0 to 1 is typically considered the whole on the line. And the student quite appropriately uses 2 1/3 to be the whole, and therefore names the fraction which we would all think of as 1/3, names it as 1/7, which is exactly right if you understand that she's calling the whole something different. And so we use that to have them learn all the things I just talked about, which is you have to think hard about the math to realize she's doing something brilliant. And she actually gives an incredibly well-structured mathematical explanation. It's just that her conclusion isn't the target explanation, because she's using something she already knew, which is you get to decide what the whole is. In area models, you don't get to decide that with the number line. And so a teacher would have to be thinking how she's likely to get positioned. She's a Black girl. She's likely to inherit all those larger tropes in our society. And she's giving an answer the teacher might hear as wrong. So instead you say, like, look at all the things that she's actually just contributed to our collective understanding of identifying fractions on the line. And we can move from there, and you can name what she did, her explanation, her confidence, the way she showed the equal intervals, the way she thought about the whole. And then you can move from there with the class where everyone's working together to keep moving. And what she's contributed is actually crucial to the development of the math. And that takes a lot of rethinking for teachers to see all of that at once, because it's a big combination of things about race, about mathematics, about gender. It's a lot of different things at once, but there are actual moves in the moment that flip the switch.
That's such a great example. And I think if I remember correctly, you also talk about how like getting students to listen to each other and like the idea of listening and revoicing as being some of those competencies that can be really important and are not typically praised, but can be acknowledged as competencies. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I think that's right, that listening is actually part of learning. It's part of contributing to collective work, is hearing what your classmates are saying and being able to reference those and build on those, but getting rid of the idea that we're mostly agreeing and disagreeing with one another. One typical pattern in a lot of school classrooms is thumbs up if you agree and thumbs down if you don't. So in the story I just told, if the teacher would have said that, then all the thumbs would have been down because no one else thought it was 1/7. So what does that do for that child's sense of identity, sense of competence, and what does everyone else think about her? So actually talking through what it is she said and how we build on that, and naming how people listened closely to what she did, is a real changing of the narrative, or at least contributes to it. I can't say it changes it.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and I find this so amazing. Like, it's one of these big changes we need to do. As you said earlier, we need to broaden our view of mathematics and what it means to learn and do mathematics. And one of those pieces, I think, is the idea. I think there's this idea that you learn the math and then you can communicate it, as opposed to what you were just saying, that the communication is actually part of the learning. And I find it so hilarious that it's sort of ironic, I guess, that mathematicians tend to have this view, even though mathematicians, like every mathematician I know, has had the experience of being confused about something, going to talk to an expert in that area, and as they're explaining like what their confusion is, they answer the question themselves. So everybody has had this experience that the communicating is a part of the learning, but then when it comes to teaching in the classroom, we don't have that. We haven't interpreted that. I want to give others a chance on the panel to chime in on this idea that that we need to sort of move from from these first two narratives about being right and being speedy, that we can acknowledge other competence. How does this strike you in terms of your own experiences in the classroom, working with future teachers, working with students, and the systems that our students are going through? Anyone want to chime in on this?
Well, I'll just mention that one of the things I hate are timed exams, because it's about getting the right answer within a limited time frame. And I've moved away from that as much as I possibly can. You get students to write about the mathematics, and that's how you find out what they've been learning. You get them to talk about the mathematics, and that's how you learn.
Right. And so much, there's huge movement within the mathematics community at especially at high school and college level toward different types of assessment, including mastery-based grading, or grading for growth, it's called in some places. This idea that like it doesn't really matter when you learn it, the point is to learn it, and so it's not about testing after week 6 if you have these things down. It's about like giving you opportunities to learn and to grow from that. To me, it's assessment that matches a growth mindset. Thanks for that, David.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it, Eric.
No, I only wanted to say I did want to honor, those teachers who are forced to give these types of exams, right, in lots of ways, right? And so what does it look like for us to still give those exams, because we, quote, have to, but also still create spaces that will allow our young people still to feel whole and welcome, right? And so in lots of ways, I've started to reposition myself against the tests that I have to give, right? To say, we're giving a test. Now let's remember that this test is part of this system that has this and this and this, and is not reflective of who you are as a person. I think that we have a big, big opportunity and a responsibility to, again, to try and detach from young people, young people's worth about as mathematical beings from the tests that they take, right? And that we have to keep saying that this C or this 75 is not representative of you as a person in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so much related to one of those narratives, right? It's about your innate ability, like it's about sort of either you are or you're not a math person, and like that test just is just suggesting, oh, I guess I'm not a math person. I better move on and find out what kind of person I happen to be. Um, Baleen, I want to make sure we bring you in part because this is some of your academic research is looking at at students and their sense of belonging. And when I think about this, this sort of goes into the math is neutral as opposed to math is like is a human endeavor done by humans. I always think about this XKCD comic that says it's ordering STEM fields by purity in some sense, right? And so there's like biology is messy, and then chemistry is a little less messy, physics, and then way over on this scale is this mathematician sitting over there who's like somehow the most pure of these. And this idea of like math is somehow pure and when you think about Plato and Platonic ideals, right? It's out there and we just sort of discover it, but the math itself is neutral. Billian, I wanted to give you a chance, especially given your vast experience here, to talk a little bit about how that particular narrative and the sort of narratives of identity played out, especially among the Latina students and the indigenous students you've worked with over the years.
Sure. The way I approached that kind of question is, one, I'm a trained mathematician and in many ways fell in love with that idealized version of mathematics as objective neutral and kind of what many call the pure mathematics. And I can kind of see where that resonates with people. And I think part of where I've come to is that notion that math is pure, that is neutral, that is objective. I think that can be questioned, but even if we did assume that was the case, that it takes a whole lot of work to actually realize that in education and in classrooms. So supposing that's true, there's a lot that's being done to make that not true, and where math can be objective, neutral, and equally accessible for all pupils and all children's. And some ways that I've seen that in my work, where I've seen Native and Latinx students really engage and be comfortable with an algorithm, and then they get used to collaborating and justifying in grade school, and then when they go to middle school, they find that even though they're being told that that they can bring in their ideas, that they feel the pressure to align with a standard algorithm or a standard way of doing things. And that just becomes kind of a microcosm of, we might have this ideal of how we think math should be and how math teaching should be and how accessible it should be, but nonetheless that there are structures that are limiting, structures and choices made by people and reinforced by people to making that a realization, to making that assumption that math is objective, neutral, and equally accessible, that there's not a lot done to make that a realization. So I really enjoy the way Dr. Ball really talks about those micro interactions and the way they extend to broader societal implications. And that kind of makes me think about the many structures that are in place that reinforce those assumptions on that slide that you talked about, getting right answer, faster is smarter. And for indigenous peoples in North America and many other countries, if we think about the structures that are in place that we note about key indicators of success and progress, like grade levels, time tests, calculus being king, how so much of those structures are part of the ongoing assimilationist project in informal educations. So for indigenous peoples, and if we think about the formalized K-12 systems in general, they've only been around for a few hundred years at the most on this continent. So what was math learning like beforehand? What was math learning like for Indigenous peoples before formalized schooling? If we subscribe to the ideal that math is neutral, objective, culture-free, what was math learning like taking place beforehand? And so I'm here with a doctorate degree, but a lot of my question asking is about how I do not know that myself for my own peoples and histories of the Nat peoples and Filipinx peoples. And the reason for that is that that was intentionally severed through academic systems. So nowadays, if we try to keep in line with that ideal of math being accessible, equity, and in line with that, I think there's a need to acknowledge those histories where structures and peoples are making choices to make to not make those realizations, to not make those idealized versions of mathematics a realization for all.
Berlin, can you get? I love this. That thank you for sharing this, and especially thank you for sharing like your own part of your own story, sort of coming up through a system and loving a math that you're now questioning. Can you talk? I know you've done a lot of work, especially with indigenous groups that are looking at math in a different way. Can you talk a little bit about what you see, the sort of transformation you see in their attitude towards mathematics when you start to bring in their own culture and when they start to see mathematics as being integrally part of their history and their communities?
Sure. So part of the ongoing efforts that I was a part of when I was a tribal college faculty at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So this is a college with specific intentions to serve Indigenous communities and students who are in creative arts. So students from all over the continent and all over the world come to IAIA, this Native School for Arts, to do creative things, to do sculpture, to do paintings, to do creative writing. And they get surprised when they see that they're required to take a math class. So my opportunity and excitement, but also a challenge, was to kind of realize and help them realize that their cultures and their creativities can be looked at and viewed as mathematical. And so there are ways to connect the problem solving aspect, the creativity that they already engaged in with whatever their creative strengths are, and position that as being part of doing mathematics, as being mathematical. So and not only that, but kind of being able to, if we can question mathematics, that kind of helps them to question things in their arts. Like if there's something so presumed as objective and neutral and culture free as mathematics, that if we have an opportunity to grapple with that kind of helps open up their world into ways that they can grapple with their critiques in the way that they engage in their arts world.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and I just love that you're teaching mathematics to a bunch of art students and connecting it to their worlds. Thank you so much for that. Everybody on the call, please, any questions or comments you have, make sure you put them in chat. Love to see what's in there already. Eris, I wanted to turn to you for a second and talk about, we already talked a little bit about this narrative about innate ability, being really key in terms of math success. As you said earlier, I think it's something you and I both benefited from, especially the side of speed and being right all the time. I had additional benefits being, an Asian American guy, like sort of, and all the stereotypes that go along with that. Some of which you didn't benefit from, and might have hindered you. Of course, like when we talk about the tests that you were talking about, that David was talking about as well, like there's a history of these tests, and tests like the SAT have their roots in eugenics. When you when you're working with teachers at all these different levels, and I know you work with K-12 teachers, you work with college teachers, and you're always helping them surface and then interrogate these narratives. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned as you help people interrogate narratives that they themselves benefited from.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. The biggest thing is that the narratives run deep and that the work is every single day, right? Like it's just, yeah, I mean, so the things that we're fighting against, as you've already alluded to, are so tied to such powerful and oppressive forces like racism, patriarchy, anti-LGBTQ stances, and all sorts of other otherisms that, again, continue to fight or continue to try and create a model mathematical student, right? And that model mathematical student looks a particular way. They talk a particular way, right? They operate a particular way. And so for me, these forces are ones that you just have to fight every single day. And so for me, that has meant, because I succumbed to those forces, as Belinda was very clear about, that I also was trained as a mathematician. And so I was brainwashed for a very long time as a teacher to believe that you had to do things a certain way in order to count mathematically, right? And so, I see across the board that these narratives, right? I'd like to think a lot in terms of these narratives because they dominate, and I mean dominate our discipline. And when I think about the narratives in particular, again, I continue to think about who is left out, who doesn't get a chance to be part of the greatest discipline in the history of people, right? And so in a lot of ways, it gets tied to having to fight comfort. And so for me as a teacher, my identity changed from someone who was comfortable to someone who was consistently uncomfortable, right? When I walked into the classroom, because what would it look like for me to leave this person out today, right? So instead of going in the class to teach the law of signs, I was going in to teach Peter and Jamal and Lindsay, right? And so that meant that the ways in which I talk, everything I would do for that 50 minutes to 90 minutes, right, would be completely centered around the people I was looking at. But if we have this narrative of, oh, you have to qualify to be good at mathematics, then what did that mean for me? That meant that I was only looking at the same 5 people every single day. Oh my goodness, right? It only meant that I had already created this subconscious hierarchy of people, and I was only looking for the certain people who nodded in order for me to get the rush that I needed to get in order for me to feel like I was being successful. It meant that when I would go in and ask for feedback, then I was really only asking from the people who I thought were really mattered, and most of the time they were white men, right? And so every day, as we all should, we need to walk into the classroom with a healthy concern and fear that we will continue to uphold the forces that leave more and more people out if we don't interrupt those narratives.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. I want to make sure there's opportunities for other people to chime in on the things that you have seen work when you're getting people to question these narratives. What are the hard conversations that need to happen to get to people to move away from the system that they were successful in?
And
David,
I'll say
Deborah,
super quickly that part of it, I hope you noticed that I just did it, that I have to start with me. Right. So the last thing I want people to do is to go in and start pointing fingers at other people, and they don't start saying what they did first. Right. Because we all succumb to it. And so it's hypocritical for us to go in and say we have a problem in math and then don't say that we are part of the problem. Everyone on this call is part of the problem. Right. So, and
that we benefited from the system that we're talking about. Yeah. This idea of identity being so important, and our identities as mathematicians for many of us. We're part of this idea of being fast and right. Yeah. Deborah, you look like you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do think it's a little bit different depending on what sort of teachers we're talking about here, because some people go into teaching who are actually harmed by those systems, and they think it's them. They think it's individual. And I would say certainly for me, my own background wasn't in mathematics at all. And for most of the people I work with who are largely becoming elementary school teachers, and I'm not right now playing into that narrative that they don't know math, which I'm really tired of hearing about, it. There's a very disparaging and deficit way we talk about elementary teachers that has to stop. If we're expecting them to lift up young people, we have to stop treating them in the way that we don't want them to treat children. I just really want to say that. However, many of them do enter the pathway to become teachers with good aspirations, but they think that they're not good at math, and they think they're not good at math because of something that has to do with the system we're talking about, where they thought it was them instead of actually seeing the larger systems that were positioning some people, all the things we've just been talking about. So I do think that for at least some of the people we're talking about, there's a rebuilding of your sense that you actually could have a positive mathematical identity, and that you can't, to Aris's point, it is about ourselves, but it's just a different starting point in some cases. About who the people are who have to then be able to do that for young people, and that's different for white teachers than it is for Black and brown teachers. But on the whole, people who become elementary teachers across different ethnic groups and across different identities have often been harmed at the hands of the system and don't think of themselves as having benefited from it, have not in fact benefited particularly from that. So I just think maybe a little nuance about that, and maybe others of you want to push back on that with me, but having been in elementary school my whole career and mostly working with such people, I do find that we talk about them and us, me, in ways that are quite deficit oriented often.
I really appreciate that. Thanks, Deborah. I want to just acknowledge that we're talking about mostly about teachers who went through systems to become teachers, and as we're seeing, as there's teacher shortages around the country, increasingly we're getting people who did not choose to be math teachers, did not make those choices, and they're being put into math classes and teaching those classes through alternative certifications and through lots of other ways that were not sort of the traditional, high school math teacher gets a math major at a college or university and gets a teaching credential. And those issues of identity are very different for somebody who was an engineer or was in the military or was some of these other pathways, or got a certification and became a social studies teacher, and then was told 3 days before the semester started by their principal, like, we're short math teachers, can you go teach algebra? Lots of stuff going on out there. Thanks for this great conversation, David. I do want to turn to you. Like the last narrative that we really wanted to interrogate on there is this idea that calculus is king. One of the things that we talked about when we were in person in Atlanta was the sort of history behind the algebra 2 sequence, the fact that goes back to 1892 and the Committee of 10, way back then, and things are different now than they were in 1892, and maybe we should update that. But the concentration on calculus isn't quite as old, and I know you've written about that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the Cold War and how we ended up praising or thinking of calculus as sort of this golden ticket at the end of high school or at the beginning of college?
Sure. Something that's been very important to me is to learn this story. The high school curriculum is shaped by what the colleges expect. And there was a great deal of debate during the 50s about what should be expected of good students in the first year of college mathematics. There was a camp that felt that students should get as much calculus as possible in that first year. But there was another camp that felt that students should get a broad introduction to mathematics. It was John Kemeny at Dartmouth, who was really the leader of this camp. And he saw the first year of college mathematics should be some combinatorics, some linear algebra, some statistics, a little bit of introduction to the ideas of calculus, but not a single focus on calculus. And what killed the Kemeny project was Sputnik. Suddenly, the country decided that we needed as many physicists and engineers as we could possibly get. And once that decision was made, calculus was put in place as what all students should be aiming for if they're going into college level mathematics. And that's when the Algebra 1 geometry, Algebra 2 really got solidified, because the idea was to take every student in high school and move them as far toward calculus as you possibly can. And you know, the calculus ball kept rolling during the 80s. There was a big movement to get calculus instruction into the high schools. There was a feeling that this would improve the level of mathematics in the high schools. And by the time we get into the 90s, so many people were taking calculus in high school that there was a general perception among students, and I know this from interviewing and talking with students at Penn State in the early 90s. If you wanted to have a chance of passing calculus in college, you had to take it first in high school, or it was just going to be beyond your reach. And as more and more students were taking it, it became not just something that was needed for students who thought they might need to take calculus. It was seen as a mark of being ready for college, as something that students saw as giving them a competitive edge if they wanted to get into one of the top colleges or universities. And that, unfortunately, is where we are today. This tremendous push to get students into calculus as early as possible and keep the entire curriculum focused on moving students toward calculus. I think in the past 20 years, there's been a recognition of the damage this does to many students who are not going on to calculus, have no intention of taking calculus, have no need for taking calculus. And so we've begun to see much more of a movement toward discrete mathematics, especially toward statistics, preparing students for data science. At the same time, we've begun to realize that you don't have to be focused just on preparing for calculus in high school in order to succeed in calculus in college. We've gotten much better at understanding how to provide supplemental instruction, how to stretch out courses, how to find different on-ramps for students. And so I'm encouraged today. I think that there are a lot more opportunities for students in college, and I think that's starting to find its way down into the high schools. Still a lot of pushback from parents who feel that their students need to be prepared for calculus. But I think I'm optimistic about changing the narrative here.
David, thank you so much for that. I think there are lots of people on this call, and many of them not mathematicians by training, maybe even most of them. And I think for those of us within the math community, it's really clear that not all of the mathematics, at the graduate level, for instance, it follows on from calculus, like topology, there's combinatorics, there's all of these things. And I think for some people, it can be a kind of a surprise, like when you get a PhD in mathematics, I always have somebody ask, like, is that just like really advanced calculus? and as an analyst, the answer is kind of yes. But for many of the rest of my colleagues, the answer was not at all. Like it's just not. It didn't follow from calculus. It was very different math, and it goes back to the word Deborah was using earlier, broaden. We need to broaden our understanding of what it means to teach and learn mathematics, but also of the mathematics itself. We need to broaden our understanding of what math is important.
Yeah, and I've been so disgusted over the years with places that actually require calculus before students are allowed into statistics. Fortunately, that's not quite as common now, but before students are allowed into linear algebra. I mean, there's no reason you need any calculus in order to take a course in linear algebra. And there's so much you can do, so many fascinating modeling situations in linear algebra that I really wish that John Kemeny had succeeded. We would have a very...
In fact, one of the most profitable ideas of the last 30 years or so, the idea of a search engine in Google wasn't based on calculus at all. It was based on linear algebra.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And we're seeing more of that. And I mean, David, you've been part of the CBMS forum on pathways. Can you talk a little bit about how people are figuring out how to introduce options other than a path toward calculus? First, that's sort of a given at the college level with quantitative reasoning and statistics, but increasingly at the end of high school.
Yeah, well, increasingly at the end of high school, I know that there are a number of experiments being done with bringing some of the kinds of algebraic techniques that are needed even within a statistics course, or perhaps 2 years of statistics. of re-examining what it is that students really need in Algebra 2, for example, in order to succeed. Also, strong movements towards modeling and bringing that into the high school curriculum. I'll put a plug in for the new AP pre-calculus because I was involved in envisioning that. And, one of the main thrusts of that is to look at functions as models. And it's a very different way of thinking about pre-calculus. It's not just hammering on the algebraic techniques and memorizing the formulas of trigonometry, but really how to think about functions. And I think that broadens the focus.
Yeah, and I think that goes to Olga's comment in the chat about, it can't just be all about the computation because all, we all have things in our pockets that can do those computations really easily. Exactly. It has to be about ideas. Yeah, Deborah, you want to jump in on that?
I'm just thinking about Shakaya Bland's comment, which is really interesting about high school math doesn't prepare most students for their college courses. And I'm wondering what you all think about the reverse as well. The college major doesn't prepare people to be high school math teachers at all. They almost don't study topics that they're supposed to be helping young people explore and come to enjoy. I've always found that extremely puzzling because they basically don't actually have a chance to relearn, unlearn, explore both a broader view of math or even the things that they were just typically normatively responsible for teaching. I wonder if you could comment, because I don't really, work with high school teachers so much, but I find this very puzzling. And my own journey toward feeling much more sort of identified with math involved some of the things you're talking about, like number theory, which of course you're not allowed to take either till you've had calculus. So I had to, as an elementary teacher, take a bunch of calculus before I got to a subject that had much more to do with what my students actually explore. They were always like totally getting off on exploring things about numbers and patterns and making conjectures of all kinds. And I would have never seen that in them had I not had the chance to take number theory. I just wouldn't have understood what they were doing. But I'm just wondering about high school teachers because they seem to be, it's like a disconnect between what you're calling the curriculum, but in the end, it is really about the teaching, not just the curriculum. It's like, who are these people and what are they doing with young people? Back to what Eris said at the beginning.
Yeah, and that's a problem that the mathematical community has been aware of for at least 100 years, that there's this disconnect between what students are seeing in high school and what they learn in college, and then what they learn in college and what they need when they teach in high school. And we need a lot more attention to how we approach these courses. Whether it's not
just about content, right? It's also ways of being and what it even means to be a student. Yeah. Right. And so there are disconnects, I think, across so many different dimensions in high school and college, that we just aren't having the appropriate conversations, the deep enough conversations. We're not having any conversations at all in some places, where literally we have our young people in a very serious transitional moment. Some of our young people are moving across the country to go into a room that looks very much like their high school classroom, but is extremely different in content and ways of being and expectations. And no one talks to that young person about the differences. And so particularly in a math class, when there are different set of expectations for math in one place, and then you go to a new place, and then no one tells that person this place is different, and here are a different set of expectations, then we're setting that person up to have some major difficulties and challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Billy, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah. So David's comment about the push to have calculus earlier and earlier. I think some of the impact I've seen in my time at tribal colleges and community colleges have been navigating the developmental math challenges. So community colleges and tribal colleges don't have the same kind of admission requirements as other larger universities. And what that means is they take in students who test at varying levels. And kind of in my experience, I do a lot of questioning. That gets me to wondering what constitutes college level mathematics, what constitutes higher education, what's the difference between secondary mathematics and college level mathematics. And that seems to have been negotiated for many years and it's ongoing, and it's never that itself hasn't been static. And so I think you asked a question, Deborah, about how are high school math teachers supposed to be prepared for that, and there's also less nuance, less opportunity to grapple with that nuance about when you're a high school math teacher, you're supposed to be preparing them for college level of mathematics. And we know that from David's history about the role of calculus, that that's been kind of a human constructed structure that's been imposed for decades now. So if we're to have, say, opportunities to engage in this broad range of mathematics, and this is kind of what I was alluding to before, that we have this idealized version of mathematics. It's expansive, it's broad, it's neutral, culture free, but then there's these choices and structures that we pose on it to keep that from being a realization for high school math teachers, for aspiring students, that we've kind of yet to grapple with that.
Thanks so much, Billeen. We are nearing the end of this this wonderful conversation this hour. This is EdFunders. This is Grantmakers for Education. I want to give you each an opportunity. Many of the folks on this call make choices about who they're funding and the programs that they're funding, and then the direction that they have a lot of influence over what happens in these spaces. I would love for each one of you to talk a little bit about maybe one project that you've seen, or that you've seen you've been a part of, or that you've seen somebody else working on, which you think has done a really good job of interrogating one of these narratives and overturning it, and getting people to understand math in a sort of broader way than is historically or traditionally seen. Anybody want to go first on that? What have you seen out there that has really done a good job of questioning these narratives that we're talking about? I'll take a stab at this. There's a movement in higher ed and inquiry-based learning to really to get students not just experiencing this here's the next math and here's how you do it. Here's the next math and here's how you do it. I think one of the things we're really good at in the math community is giving students tools for answering questions that they don't have at all. They don't have those questions, but we'll give them tools to help them answer that. And I think with inquiry-based learning, there's a lot more attention to let's understand what the questions are, why you would want to ask them, maybe even get students to ask some of those questions. And then and now that you have a headache, here's the Tylenol, right? Here are the tools that you can use to answer those questions. And I think that's more attention to sort of what's going on in their heads, and what we would call socio-emotional learning in private, and probably wouldn't use those same terms in a bigger setting because they've been political. But I think that inquiry-based learning has done a lot. Anybody want to jump in with, Deborah?
Well, I'm not sure you're going to like this answer, Dave, but and rather than looking for a place, I think if you were asking, or a program or something, or a group of people who really have are doing things to disrupt these narratives, a little bit what troubles me, or what I say positively we could be doing, is linking people who've done parts of this. There are many things that we've been talking about today, like having a math curriculum that broadens what math is and what being math is, and the things that we've been talking about. And then there's actually serious attention to the work of teaching, which often gets neglected because we think we can solve everything through curriculum. And then there's really thoughtful work that's been done about really seeing children's assets, or young people's assets, that's more learner-centered. And I'm not trying to create divides here. I'm actually trying to say the opposite, which is, and then what does school organization or departmental organizations look like that make that possible? I think we're too busy, and maybe in some sense the race to raise money has actually exacerbated that, because you have to kind of prove you have the thing that will put it all together. But if we actually learn to work more collectively across these divides that we have, we would get further. And I wonder what it would take to do that, because I sometimes feel like the effort to raise money, as I just said, has sometimes exacerbated the need to show you have it all, where I don't think any of us probably has it all. We each have done things that are rather crucial to tackling the problems and disrupting these narratives we've been talking about. But this may not be a popular answer, so I'll stop to see what my colleagues think.
Thank you very much for that, Deborah. Appreciate that. Billeen,
I see that Laura Cornish has her hand up.
Oh, yeah. Laura, you want to jump in here with a question?
Thanks. Actually, it's not a question. I think you asked a subset of the people on this call to share an experience with something that
Sure.
is disrupting those narratives. But I want to tell the group what we're doing here, because I feel like this will be a supportive audience, and you'll be happy about it with me. So I'm a marketing professor in the business school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. But I was an applied math major in college, and I'm now an associate dean. And about 10 years ago, we got rid of our calculus requirement for our business students. So that was, we dethroned the king, and the business faculty worked with the Department of Mathematics faculty on our campus and developed a math class that mimics the way students are going to be using mathematics in their career. So it's in the context of business applications, using data, using Excel. It's taught by the math faculty. It's a math course. Students think of it as an Excel course, but we have decided that we'll let them think that because that motivates them. But there's not one right way to do these problems, because we're not teaching the methods. We're giving them interesting problems to work on. So if there's anyone else on this call that is adjacent or in the business school math education realm, then I wanted to make sure I got to say my thing and say hi to them.
Laura, thank you so much for that. David or Belinda, we have time for maybe one more comment here. Do you have any particular place that you think they're doing a good job of upending these narratives? Go ahead, Belinda.
I hope I can speak briefly. A couple points. One of my colleagues, Dr. Nikki Sandoval, who's here at West Ed, used to be director of the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. And one thing that was striking to me that I learned about a couple weeks ago was that their Department of Education supported education from age 0 to 100, meaning it was structured as a K-12 and higher ed system, but that they're truly putting support through lifelong learning beyond a structured K-12 system. So I thought that was striking, and I think something to think about, the way that we support and fund and reinforce time-based mathematics even through grade levels and progressing through college, and the way that we constitute what counts as success. Secondly, the work with tribal colleges and universities at their heart of their missions are striving for educational sovereignty. So TCUs are trying to find opportunities to see mathematics not as part of the broader system, but for tribal nations and towards nation building. And so there's ongoing questioning and work towards understanding what that means, and then consequently think about what mathematics means, not for broader economic opportunities, but for nation building. And so there's opportunities to think outside of that predominant system. And I think what Laura mentions is kind of like there could be a tie-in with what that means and what does it mean to structure mathematics outside of the system for more particular purpose. But for TCUs, that's been at the heart of what they've been trying to do for, TCUs are 50 years old, but it's part of the ongoing centuries old traditions of taking ownership of educational sovereignty and exercising that.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Olka, I see you back on screen.
I know.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. This has just been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thanks for giving us this opportunity.
No, thank you all. And the great thing is there's so many kind of interesting topics, themes, ideas, right? What do we do around curriculum? How do we think about teacher preparation and educator support? And this is exactly what this series is meant to do, kind of teeing up these questions by exploring and examining some of these narratives so that we can have conversations about what some ways are that we can and should be thinking about modernizing and sort of moving math forward. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to our participants. We will make sure to to scrape the links in the chat and see if we can't put them up on the website. This video will be available on our website in about a week, in case you've missed pieces and want to go back and listen, or for you to share with other folks. And then we do have a few upcoming programs for EdFunders in November and December before we end the year, and the rest of this series will start in the first quarter of next year. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.